Hello there. Welcome to another episode of From Ireland to Palestine. Our guest today is Bill Shaw. He's a non-active minister in the Presbyterian Church in Ireland. It's unusual for someone in that position to be outspokenly pro-Palestinian, but as we'll get into, Bill has been doing just that for a number of years now, speaking about Israel's crimes in Palestine. He's also the now retired CEO of the 174 Trust, which was a vehicle for peace and reconciliation here in Ireland. So he's a number of insights there which might lend themselves to the situation in Palestine should Israel ever choose to open itself to peace dialogue. So Bill, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Patrick.
So this is a question that always interests me is how people come to religion, but you didn't start your life in a religious environment. You sort of had a conversion experience, as you just described it there.
Well, I've had many conversion experiences, my first was in my mid-20s. I had a sort of nominal Protestant upbringing, Sunday school and sort of loose connection to church. But in my mid-20s, I had, as I say, the first of a number of conversions where I came to faith and became a Christian in that evangelical sense. Mm-hmm. And after a couple of years, I was working in construction. I was married, had started a family, and I felt what I understood to be a call to ministry. And I chatted with people, and the upshot of all of that was I resigned from my job, started Queen's University, did my theology, worked in a series of churches, including 3 years on the Shankill Road, and then 7 years in two churches in the Portadown area.
And what drew you to religion? What do you think? What was it about religion? So where did that calling come from?
I think it was, like a lot of people, it's the big question: what happens afterwards? Where do we go if we go anywhere? And as I say, having had that nominal connection with the church, I mean, the evangelical answers to those questions at that time seemed to make sense. Mm-hmm. So that in many ways was the context. For that shift in direction in the trajectory of my life and I suppose my professional career.
Yeah. And did you always, you've spoken out very powerfully in terms of justice for Palestinians. Did you always have a very sort of strong sense of right and wrong, a sort of strong moral core? Was that part of
I think that was something that evolved or emerged out of my Christian faith, a sense of justice and what I understand social justice to be, and trying to level the playing field in our own society, where people are disadvantaged from birth in many cases. So that strong sense of social justice I took on board and tried to work it out in the organisation that I headed up for 27 years until 2 weeks ago. So 174 Trust, as you say, was a peace and reconciliation organisation, but one with a very strong Christian ethos, but as importantly, a social justice element, a strong social justice element to it.
Yeah. And you grew up in Sandy Row, and that wouldn't be a place we'd associate with sort of strong pro-Palestine sentiment. So what did you learn about Israel and Palestine when you were growing up?
I grew up in a household where, my parents had lived through the war. My mum in particular seemed to be deeply affected by the Holocaust and wore a Star of David for as long as I could remember. I have a brother who identifies as a Zionist, and none of those things.
At Christmas. It must be interesting at Christmas.
That's a whole other story. But in those days, certainly growing up, I had little or no interest. I've got to say, in what was happening in the Middle East, that would have been the case right up until my first visit. Mm-hmm. So I went on my first visit in 2013. I had no skin in the game. Mm-hmm. I went with little or certainly no emotional preparation for what I was, or historical preparation. So I had little idea of what had happened historically or what was happening currently in 2013 as it was. Mm-hmm. but again, another conversion experience, just because of what I saw and what I experienced in the 5-day program when I was there in 2013.
Aye. But people who go to Palestine, even people who are sympathetic towards Palestine, when they go there, they say they're kind of shocked by just how bad it is. Is that kind of what you?
Well, shock doesn't even come close. I mean, I don't want to be overly dramatic about it, but in many ways, I was traumatized by what I saw and the suffering that was inflicted on Palestinian people. Day after day, incident after incident, and I could repeat them because they're indelibly marked in my mind and in my heart. So much so that from the moment I came back from that trip, late 2013, I was committed, first of all, to tell people what I saw. I still couldn't give it a historical context, but I thought, well, I can tell them what I saw because that's incontrovertible. What I saw, what I witnessed. And then I also started reading and studying and talking and finding out about what had happened historically and what was happening currently and what were potential solutions going forward. 2014 then was my first experience of the genocide that was being inflicted on Gaza, and I became an activist on the streets, marching and not speaking because I still wouldn't have had the knowledge or the confidence to speak out at the time. But certainly, if there were protests, and there were many in that summer of 2014, I was there. And again, as you say, hailing from Sandy Row, there weren't many. Not from Sandy Row, but there weren't many Protestants. I used to joke that I was the member, one sole member of the group, Prods for Palestine, and I would have got a banner, but there was no one else to hold the other end.
Well, we probably don't need another activist group in Belfast. I've just speaking to people like
that was 2014. But as I say, that first trip was the thing that just flipped my world. But again, as I say, because of what I saw, and I was with a mixed group of people. They weren't all pro-Palestinian. It was literally half and half, 50-50.
And did they all come away from it with the same sort of experience you had?
I was probably, and it's no surprising for those that know, I was probably the most outspoken, both on the trip and afterwards. So there were people who went there and probably had a number of things confirmed for them. I would love to talk to the Protestants who were on that trip to see what impact it had in a long-term sense. But I know for me, it changed everything for me.
And what did you see? Like what was? I mean, to me, like I think the first time something in the conflict made me burst into tears was just like a tale of petty humiliation about hearing how Israeli soldiers would just take over Palestinian homes and push. They felt that there was one occasion where it was in Breaking the Silence. I think a soldier described how he and his colleague wanted to just watch a football match. They just said, we'll go and take over a Palestinian home. We'll put them in a back room and we'll just sit and watch TV. And there's nothing they could do. It's just that sort of petty act of humiliation. It's just very... I saw
that repeatedly. But it was the very first night, our group was split into two, and we were hosted by two Palestinian families in the hills of Bethlehem. And the father sat. We were outside, and all the things I'd thought about Bethlehem, and all the biblical association. And this man who would have been my age, with two sons standing behind him, talking about how this was the third house he'd built with his own hands. The previous two having been demolished, and the house that we were being hosted in was under a 24-hour warning that literally the IDF could come and demolish it. And the first thing I thought about, as someone who had grown up with the associate, Palestinian means suicide bomber, Palestinian means terrorist. I thought, well, that could be me sitting there, because I've three sons. That could be me with my sons, and I would understand listening to his story. And I've got to say, feeling something of his pain, I could understand if my sons wanted to be involved in in resistance, and that was the first, I suppose, experience of empathy for a Palestinian. But it went. I mean, we went to Surat, the Israeli town nearest Gaza, the next day, and this bizarre experience of talking to people who are dealing with traumatized Israeli kids, because they said they were only 15 seconds from Gaza. If a rocket was fired, they had to get to a bomb shelter, and when they'd finished their spiel, I asked a question. I said, look, we were on the road looking down and across the Gaza plain into Gaza. Do you share, as health professionals, do you share best practice with Palestinian health providers in Gaza? And the woman, she just sneered.
And scoffed at it, yeah.
I said recently, and I don't know whether it was like I farted, like she just looked at me incredulous that I would ask such a question. I don't even remember she poo-pooed the answer. And we got this dismissive attitude that, the Israelis were in charge. And and I've said so many times, if anyone's in any doubt about the evils of the occupation, go to Hebron, spend a day in Hebron. Which we did. And time after time, we saw that humiliation, that restriction, and that privilege that Israeli Jews have, or not even Israeli Jews from Boston or Belfast or Belarus or wherever, can come and can build an apartment on top of a Palestinian apartment without
throwing rubbish down.
And then throw rubbish. So they need a net above it. Our Palestinian guide couldn't walk the roads that we could walk. Horrendous. And just time after time after time after time. We saw this humiliation. We saw the evils of the occupation. And and I could give you a list, and we could spend the rest of the afternoon. But the last day, having spent some time with the Bedouin family, we got a couple of hours free time in Jerusalem, which is something I'd looked forward to all my life. But by that time, I was almost physically sick. I just felt, so I rushed round. I saw the wall, and we did the Via Dolorosa and all, and then we got the commuter bus back to Bethlehem where we were staying, and we got off. We had to show our passports. You had to go through the click-clack gates that we had in Belfast, and we had taxis waiting on the other side of the wall to take us back to our hotel. And I was reflecting on all the things throughout the previous 4 or 5 days. And I started looking at the wall, and the other delegates were saying, come on, Bill, come on, taxi's here. And I was looking at the Banksy stuff, and I was looking at the graffiti. And then I saw this graffiti, and I've told this story so many times because it's just one of those moments. And I said, now that you've seen this, you are responsible. And I physically couldn't move. It was like my feet were in concrete. I couldn't move, and I stood and I cried. And I thought, yeah, again, and I didn't know about Balfour. I mean, I was so ignorant. I didn't even know about Balfour, and all the other evils that the empire have produced. But I thought, yeah, I'm responsible for what I've seen. Now I've got to tell. And I made a promise that day that I would do what we're doing now. Every opportunity, any opportunity, I would tell people what I saw. Because that's what Palestinians are asking. Come and see, and then go home and tell.
Yeah. You think there is a big difference to actually going, seeing for yourself?
Oh, yeah. And again, I think the tragedy heaped upon tragedy, the number of Christians, particularly evangelical Christians, who do pilgrimages that are controlled by the Jewish state and deliberately engineered so that they have no contact with native Palestinians, and also so that they don't contribute to the economy on the West Bank. And I've talked to so many, oh yeah, I've been there. And what did you see? And then they tell you, oh, we saw the Sea of Galilee, and we saw all these nice touristy things and biblical things, which, totally masks the suffering that Palestinian people have been experiencing for almost 100 years.
If you're not careful as well, if you're a Christian delegation, you might get spat at. I mean, we've seen footage of that
and
kind of thing.
Yeah, that's something also, like, sharing with evangelical Christians that, you know, it's not what you think it is. You know, they're not our friends.
Yeah.
I mean, and thankfully, because of social media, it's much more likely that you'll get to see that.
Mm. And just coming back then to the climate here, we do a regular protest at the BBC near Sandy Row, and we've got to be a bit careful about it, especially coming up to 12th, because there was a bonfire getting built there. And the last time we were there, someone came out and waved a flag at us, and everyone was trying to work out, well, what's that flag? Why is he waving that flag at us? And it turned out to be an IDF flag, an IOF flag, as we'd call it. So, but I mean, that's one side of things. But some people say there's been a bit of a shift. Some people say they see fewer Israeli flags in unionist or loyalist areas. What do you think there's been a shift? Do you think it's getting to the point where people think Israel is just beyond the pale and just...
I would like to think so.
Yeah.
I genuinely would like to think so. I'm still horrified. I mean, I do some work in Tigers Bay, and I've been in Sandy Row. I volunteer at a men's breakfast on a Tuesday morning, and it's just around the corner from the bonfire site, and there were Israeli flags up, and it just makes my heart sink, because it's just an unthinking response. There is this certain default position for Protestants. You know, if they're going to take sides, it's got to be Israel, because, you know, all this. Or they've got Palestinian flags on their side. What's the opposite of the Palestine? It must be the Israel, so we'll do that. And I think that's a motivation for some of the Israeli flags. But I posted something on social media. Someone had put an IOF flag up, and I was just incredulous. Someone would go to the trouble to source an IOF flag, and then buy it, and then put it up, knowing how offensive. Because this is a military occupation that has killed 60,000. I think is a low estimate. I think when things settle down in true numbers, but at least 20,000 kids have been murdered, blown apart in many cases by this organization. You know, I just find it incredulous that any right-thinking person with even an iota of humanity in them could do it. Could put the Israeli flag, much less the IOF flag up.
Right, well, that's what I try and say to people. I say, look, I can kind of understand if reflexively you support Israel, if that's just been something that's been part of your life to this point, but surely you got to look at the kind of things you're talking about and say, look, it's time to stop now. It's just beyond the point where you can keep supporting them. Do you feel like you have any sway with people who are still on the fence about it? Do you feel like you've done any inroads to shift their...
You mean within the Protestant community?
Within the Protestant community, yeah.
I think I've burnt my bridges. And not just over the Palestinian issue, because I've been working for 27 years in the New Lodge. That immediately makes me suspect in the eyes of people in Tigers Bay or Sandy Row. That's, you know, that's something that I can't do anything about. That, you know, my commitment, as I say, is to social justice, peace and reconciliation. Whether that's in a North Belfast context, where people on either side of a wall are still living socially disadvantaged lives because of, you know, government policy that goes back 20, 30 years.
And those are the most disadvantaged parts of Belfast, New Lodge and Tigers Bay.
And, you know, in Catholic and Protestant communities, the socioeconomic factors are the same in those working class communities. Yeah. And instead of fighting those conditions, we have been used by our paymasters to fight each other. So my commitment to peace and reconciliation, I think, is there hopefully there for all to see. But because I'm physically based in the New Lodge, you know, that means maybe my voice is less welcome.
Gone over the other side, is it?
And certainly on social media, when my allegiance to Palestine, justice for Palestine, became, I mean, people added 2 and 2 and got 22. You know, that's typical. So, but again, I'm often asked, even by friends, you know, what difference does it make standing outside the BBC or being at City Hall or being wherever? And my answer is that I know from the people in Palestine it makes a difference to them, you know, because they see it on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from my own mental health point of view, it helps me, you know, avoid self-combustion.
Yeah.
Just because of the pain and the anger that I feel. I feel when I'm marching, when I'm protesting, when I'm doing whatever, that I'm doing something that even as of a little help.
Yeah. Well, you can basically, the classic activist phrase is you can do nothing and guarantee that nothing happens, or you can do something and maybe even if it's a slim possibility something will happen. It's still worth trying it.
Yeah.
Like as you say, just to get it off your chest, it's enough sometimes. So obviously, when you went to Palestine, you would have met Palestinian Christians. What are they asking of us? What?
Well, not the first time. The first time, it was a completely secular trip. It was balanced in that there were Protestants, Catholics, Northerners, Southerners, and pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian. The second time I went, when I come back from the first trip, I had to do something. So there's another woman that I knew had been on the ecumenical accompaniment program, and I got talking to her, and she introduced me to the Charis movement.
Who are they?
And the Charis movement, there was a South African Charis movement where they called to the churches in the West. And what happened in 2009, the churches in Palestine, Christian churches in Palestine, called to the churches in the West to stand in solidarity with them against the oppression and the occupation, to back the BDS and non-violent resistance. And I realised online, the Charis Palestine, the cry from Christians in Palestine had been responded to by Christians in Britain, in the US, in Germany, Australia, but not in Ireland. You know, and so the two of us started talking about the practicalities of getting a church response, and we realised that was probably as likely as whatever in trying to get the churches to make a statement on anything. Right. So we pulled a couple of people in across the Christian spectrum, Protestant and Catholic. Even got two atheists, and we made sure to balance it with a Protestant atheist and a Catholic atheist who were active in the Palestinian movement. So Charis Ireland came into being, and we started to have meetings, and we started to prepare a document that we ultimately sent to Palestine, and it was endorsed by Charis Palestine. And then in response to that, literally the day after we launched it, the document here in Belfast, I flew back to Palestine for the Charis conference in 2018. And that was my first introduction to Palestinian Christians. It was hosted by Munther Isaac, the Lutheran pastor. He was in Bethlehem. He's now in Ramallah, but he was in Bethlehem at that time, and that's where the conference was held. And again, I met Christians from around the world who had come to Palestine for that conference as an expression of solidarity with sisters and brothers in Palestine. So I continue to be part of Charis Ireland. I was back last May, for a conference in Bethlehem Bible College, Christ at the Checkpoint. And again, Munther Isaac is involved in Bethlehem Bible College, as are other Palestinian Christians, and again gave me another opportunity to meet a wider range of Christians. Now they're still relatively small percentage-wise, but they are active. And they're vocal, and particularly Munther Isaac is vocal on a global stage, and is using his position as a Palestinian Christian to call out the churches in the West who have been sinfully silent, and have faffed about and made mealy-mouthed statements in the past. Some have been more outspoken in recent weeks and months. But why does it take 20 months of a genocide before Christians can speak out?
Why? That's the question. Why? Why do you think the church has taken so long to?
I think they were
get anywhere.
They were frightened. They don't want to be seen as being political or controversial. And also a number of them have allowed Jewish-Christian relations to silence them.
Right.
I have a friend of mine who's a Presbyterian pastor in New York State, and I preached regularly for at least annually for him, and that was his experience. He wanted to speak out, but he felt that the local synagogue was putting pressure on the interfaith team just to keep silent.
Right.
And that's happened in Belfast as well with the Jewish-Christian dialogue. They've also censured church leaders when they've come back from a trip and tried to speak out or write things. And again, it's this Holocaust guilt that they lay on people. So there are lots of reasons, but it would, for every church leader, they probably have different reasons. Some of them are still in denial that there's although how one could be in denial that there's a genocide when even Israeli newspapers are acknowledging that it's a genocide. And former politicians and prime ministers are saying it's a genocide. So there are ministers who are Zionists, and again that calls into question the whole role that the heresy of Christian Zionism. But it's infected the Western Church, both in the UK and particularly in the US, and poisoned so much of call for social justice and particularly justice for Palestinians.
How do you counter Christian Zionism on a theological level? I mean, I encounter it frequently, like when I'm on protests, get people come up to me and say, sure, the Jews were promised the land by God 2,000 years ago or whatever, and there's, like, I can challenge it on an activist level, talk about how Israel's not justified in what it's doing. It doesn't make sense to claim land from 2,000 years ago. But on a theological level, how would you confront someone like that?
The Caris Ireland document that we produced was largely written with that goal in mind of setting the record straight and pointing out that Christian Zionism is a heresy. Yeah. It's based on a misinterpretation of Scripture. It's based on sound bites that are taken out of context, which Christians love to do anyway, in so many different contexts. But I also then, offer that there are Palestinian Christian theologians that have written extensively, and they're much more eloquent than I am in pointing it out. Stephen Sizer is an Anglican minister, again, who was disciplined by his church for his long-standing commitment to Palestinian justice, and he's written extensively on Christian Zionism. So I'm always happy to provide books if people want, because if we're just dealing in sound bites, people just shut down.
But it is it's something you encounter quite. I mean, there is a sort of strand of probably religious fundamentalism in this country.
There is.
That's higher than probably other parts of Britain or Ireland. So you do encounter it quite frequently. So there probably is mileage in pursuing that, isn't there? I would guess maybe in trying to.
Oh, there is. People. People are open to a conversation. I mean, I'm always keen, whether it's on social media or whatever, to say, look, let's meet up.
Yeah.
Let's meet up and let's talk about it, because it's not something if you're just going to trade sound bites, you're not going to get very far. But there are really good books, not all heavy theological books that have been produced that show the error and the evil that Christian Zionism is, and for me the bottom line is when you hear a Palestinian Christian saying, well, if you're telling me that God gave this land to the Jews, what does that say to me? Because Palestinian Christians were the first Christians.
Yeah, they should have a particular authority on that basis.
And I mean, yesterday, the IOF bombed the only Catholic church in Gaza.
Yeah,
killed at least two, and they're trying to extinguish the Christian presence in that country, where Christianity started, after all.
And I think they have a plan for doing that. There's so much Islamophobia around that they like to try and characterize all Palestinians as Muslim, because it's more easy to demonize them at that point. So,
and I think
Christian churches plays into that.
It's not unreasonable to see their hand in the Islamophobic campaign around the world, both on social media and on the street. I mean, we've seen on our own streets. Both last August and more recently, this pushback, and again they talk about immigrants and boat people, and what they're talking about Muslims.
Yeah,
they're talking about Muslims, and you can see how the Zionist lobby is just rubbing their hands and loving that.
And I think it's probably not enough it's unfortunate it has to be that way, but there isn't really enough awareness of that there are Christians in Palestine, and as a result, it probably does play.
Well, again, there's a meme, like Jesus was a Palestinian. I love throwing that into the conversation because that, people whose minds are blocked, that
blows their minds.
Blows their minds.
Yeah.
I remember a man in a church I used to worship in, and I used to have back in 2014, when I started getting involved, I thought, well, as soon as somebody says to me in a conversation, either face to face or on social media, they're God's people, God promised, that was it. I thought, I'm not going there.
Yeah.
There was a guy I unfriended on Facebook, and he actually rang my office to see why I had unfriended him. And I said, if someone says that to me, I don't go there. About a year later, I bumped into him in a city centre shop. And he was going to walk past, and he stopped. And I said, "How are you?" And he said, "You unfriended me." And we had a conversation. And he started the usual sort of Christian Zionism, but he didn't see it as that.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, "Well, what would you say to your Christian brothers and sisters in Palestine?"
Mm-hmm.
And it was rabbit in headlights. He just
looked
looked at me and said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You do realize that not all Palestinians are Muslim,
mm-hmm.
that there are Christian Palestinians?"
Uh-huh.
And he just walked. It didn't
know.
compute.
Yeah,
he couldn't process that information.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, if that wasn't the case, I think we might see quite a big shift in terms of pro-Palestinian sentiment.
I think so, but again, Palestinian Christians are always keen to point. They're in solidarity, obviously, with their fellow countrymen who happen to be Muslims.
Yeah,
because they're all suffering under the occupation.
Yeah.
And I mean that's something that needs to be made clear, but it is apparent.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, you're, in terms of trying to shift the Christian position, you've worked with the group called Christians for Palestine. So maybe tell us a bit about what they've been doing and what you think just the role of Christians on a day-to-day basis should be and ought to be in terms of Palestine.
Christians for Palestine is an interesting one. There was a woman at one of the early, and I'm thinking it might have been December 2023. I think I had spoken at a rally that finished up at City Hall, I seem to remember, and she came over to me because I was introduced as a speaker, but as the Reverend Bill Shaw. And she came over to me and asked me the not unreasonable question, where are the other clergy?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, first of all, I don't see myself here as a clergy person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an activist. But she says, why are there not more clergy? And I said, well, you would need to ask them. So at the next, I think the Christmas, we had a prayer vigil on Christmas Day outside City Hall that I was asked to share. And I probably wore my collar because it was Christmas Day.
Mm-hmm.
And she brought her mother, her, I think, 92-year-old mother,
right,
to meet me and introduce me because she wanted her to meet a clergyman who was also an activist.
Uh-huh.
So Diane is the woman's name, and she's been the driving force behind Christians for Palestine. And you know, it's a wide ranging and an entirely organic ecumenical body because there are devout Catholic folk who are active within their parishes, mm-hmm, who have called out their bishops and their priests on this. So we've come together, and they've been active both during services, outside services, in all Christian traditions, but also always trying to encourage a dialogue between the clergy, mm-hmm, whether it's a minister or a priest, and the leadership of the church, to say, why are the church silent? Mm-hmm. Because as we're wont to say at the rallies, silence is complicity. If you're not going to challenge and you're not going to speak out, then you know you're on the side of the oppressor.
Yeah, silence is violence.
So Christians for Palestine is an entirely grassroots group of people that are driven because their churches and their parishes have been silent, mm-hmm, in the face of the genocide.
How do you think it's going? Do you think there has been? I think it's succeeded in shifting.
I think certainly in my limited, I hadn't been as active as a lot of them within the group. But I know in a number of cases, as a result of a presence either outside or during the service, not disrupting them, but during the service, priests and ministers have been open to a conversation, and they produced leaflets that we've given them out after Mass at some Catholic churches and outside after services within Protestant churches, and there's been pushback as well. On that, but it's people doing what they can where they can to raise a voice to say this is happening, and the churches really need to speak out.
Yeah. And I was at one of the one on stuff the church just off the Lisburn Road where we went and we protested as they were going in, and then we got in to go in afterwards and speak to the congregation, and that seemed fairly productive. I don't know where that went from there, but I mean,
well, there was an official complaint put in.
Is that right?
About my presence.
Oh, about your presence, okay.
To my presbytery, and I had to have a meeting with the clerk of presbytery and a minister in the church and explain what we were doing, and more importantly, or just as importantly, correcting the impression that they had been given that we had disrupted the service.
No, it's quite the opposite.
It's quite the opposite. I think the consensus amongst all of us was that it had been very productive and well received, but the minister made sure that he didn't write the letter. The moderator of the non-subscribing church wrote the letter, and I've tried to engage him in dialogue. But But again, that's a guy who is a convinced Zionist. I mean, he's a spokesperson for the Jewish community, the small Jewish community in Belfast, a self-appointed spokesman for that.
Jewish himself, is he? He's not Jewish himself.
No, he's not. But this has been one of his niche markets that he's tried to. And I know him of old, and he's very definitely a spokesman for the Zionist regime in Israel.
Yeah, he's spoken out in support of Histadrut and done work with Histadrut, the Israeli trade union.
When Omar Barghouti was on one of his earlier trips, I mean, several years ago, pre-COVID, it was on Crawley. Chris Hudson made sure that he was there as well, and made to look rather foolish because Omar Barghouti tied him in knots, and Chris Hudson got very angry, but as he tends to do.
I think you were on talkback with him as well, weren't you? The same time we had Owen.
Well, he rang in. He phoned in his opposition, which I wasn't surprised about.
Literally and metaphorically.
Yeah, he is what he is. I consider him a fraud, someone who pretends to be a defender of human rights, and yet he can't see how the human rights of Palestinians have any parity with the Israelis.
Yeah, well, it's kind of the moral. That's William Crawley. I'm not the biggest fan of William Crawley, but on the day he described it as a moral issue of our time, Palestine. So if you can't be right on that, what use are you? But like I say, just I thought that day was quite useful. But there's been a debate in Christians for Palestine about what the best way to prevent inaction from the church is. Do you go in and be a bit more disruptive? Do you try and do it a bit more conciliatory the way we did that day? How have you weighed that up? How have you made that decision?
I think in any group of activists, there's always going to be a difference of opinion of who wants to be more upfront and more disruptive, and I think the same goes for Christians for Palestine. I think the action that really put them on the map was Armagh Cathedral, which was the one that particularly attracted the ire of Chris Hudson, in particular. The people who went, and from what I wasn't there, in spite of what Chris Hudson says, I wasn't there. But the people who went, and the response that they got from a lot of the parishioners was one of support, not condemnation. But they felt they had made their point. Other activity that I've been involved in, like you, not only outside the non-subscriber, but at St Mary's and Chapel Lane and other places. The response has been very positive. I remember the Methodist Church on the Lisburn Road, where they invited us in again for coffee and for a conversation, and assured us that they stood with us. I think Christians for Palestine, it's been one of those, because it's been this organic thing. There's been leadership, but non-elected leadership, and we don't have a constitution. So I think we're probably through that initial rush of enthusiasm.
Yeah, and the grind of doing it.
And reality now, if we're going to sustain this with this goal within the churches, then there has to be a strategy of sorts.
Yeah.
So I think we're probably at that. I know we're in a sort of the July period and folks on holiday and so on, but I imagine that towards the end of the summer there'll be a coming together and a strategy thrashed out about where we go from here.
Yeah. So I would attend one or two meetings of Christian for Palestine, and I saw that split. The reason we in BDS favour direct action is just because of the case we'd make is just the urgency of the situation. It's ideally you'd like to, the most civilized way to do politics is you all get in the room and you all talk to each other and you work it all out. But that's a time-consuming process, and you don't even know if the people are ready to talk yet. So in such a case, and with the urgency of genocide going on, direct action seems the only method to sort of speed things up. So
that's my own preferred
your
position.
Yeah.
I've got to say, there are people within Christians for Palestine that are more gracious and quieter souls. But I couldn't agree more. This is not a time for long drawn out debates. People are being killed every day.
Yeah.
And in many cases, just going for water or basic necessities, they're being mown down. And Israel just seems to act with impunity. Yesterday, they bombed Syria, Damascus.
Defense minister, around city centre. Yeah.
And no one seems to even want to try and keep them in check. So something has to be done. I think internationally something has to be done. I also think locally things have to be done here.
Yeah. So recently, like in terms of food distribution, the IOF and the American mercenaries had introduced like a flag system, and they're now going to have like a red flag when the place is shut and the green flag. And it's like, why did that?
Yeah.
Why did you only communicate with bullets before? Which is what the Israeli soldiers themselves said. This is sort of like a broader question, but obviously, like when you're a Christian minister, I'd imagine part of your role is to try and encourage people to lead like a more moral life, to lead the best possible life they can in terms of doing right by other people, making the world a more just place. Like, obviously, as activists, we're in some sense doing the same sort of thing. We're trying to convince people to do the right thing. Is there do you have any suggestions on the best way an activist would go about doing that?
We had a conversation. There's a group of us from different faiths. Mm-hmm. We meet once a month in the Dunkirk, and we have lunch and we just chat. And we had a wonderful conversation yesterday about the thread that runs through all major faiths, mm-hmm. of loving our neighbour, mm-hmm. And doing unto others what we would want them to do, and on the negative side, not doing to them what we wouldn't want done to us. It's in Islam, it's in Judaism, it's in the Baha'i faith, it's in Hinduism. The Hindu friend of mine that was saying grace yesterday talked about this Hindu phrase about don't eat unless your neighbour eats. Mm-hmm. And we were talking if how much better the world would be if we practiced that basic tenet that's in all, particularly not only the Abrahamic faith, but in all major faiths, that we treat people the way we want to be treated. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's necessarily a religious issue. For me, it's an issue of common humanity. That we and again, it goes to the heart of the situation in Palestine. We have been taught by our media, by whoever, to see Palestinians as less than. So that, we make comparisons with the conflict, the war in Ukraine, but they're whiter than the Palestinians. So, that's where, and it's a race issue, and so there has to be a total mind shift. I think where we see that we are each other, that wherever we live in the world, whatever color we have, however we practice religion or don't, we're part of the one family. That these kids in Palestine could be my grandkids, could be yours, but we're part of the one family. And Israel can get to do what they do for as long as they've got to do it, because we've been taught to see them as less than. So as I say, whether you want to, and I'm averse to quoting Bible verses about anything, but if we see ourselves in each other, that's one of the basic, fundamental, foundational elements of peace building. But it's also in trying to seek justice for an Indigenous people that have been brutalised for over 100 years. So, and again, that goes for Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Muslims, or Palestinian atheists, whatever. They are people that deserve justice.
I think there has been a shift in that. I think people, as they've seen Palestinians on their screens more, I think Palestinians generally comport themselves much better than Israelis on the screen, so probably people do see them and get a better impression of them, but it feels like there's a long way to go in that, doesn't there?
I think there's a long way, because the Zionist regime have been so clever in that their spokespeople are usually Westerners that have moved there to occupy Palestine. So they sound like us, or they were educated, like Netanyahu, educated in the US. So I mean, we're pushing a big rock. But I think if we all get our shoulders against the rock and push it, we're going to, and it will. I hope it will happen. If I was at a conference on Saturday in London, and they quoted one of my heroes, Eric Cantona, who said, "If Gaza is lost, humanity is lost."
Yeah, well, people say that people often relate their own freedoms to what's going on in Palestine. They say, if you by freeing Palestine, we free ourselves. That if you understand that the same ruling class here, who are prepared to, impoverish people here, cut the health service, provide bad, lousy housing, whatever else, they don't care about your lives. They'd probably kill you if it suited them to do so. So it's not hard for them to kill Palestinians. So it's all interrelated in that sense. Yeah. I mean, do you think there's any way of getting over that hurdle? Is it just like something innate in humans that it's very difficult to get humans to broaden their circle of empathy, to see everyone and every creature as being like them?
I think that's part of human nature. I think it's one of the roles that religion plays in a negative sense, in that we're taught to look after our own tribe, our own clan, our own people, and others, and see them as less than. We had that own version in our own country for a long time.
It was almost as racialized at times as it is. People practically saw the other side as almost like a different species here. It was an amazing thing, even
as long as they recognised, where they are in society, and I mean that's been the plight of the Palestinians since the Zionists started invading Palestine in the early 20th century.
Yeah, so the Israelis are as someone said, the great problem is we see the Israelis as us and the Palestinians as the other.
Which was always the intention of Western imperialism, to get a foothold in the Middle East. I can't remember which one of the British politicians said in the 20s or 30s about creating a little Ulster in the Middle East. And that's what they did.
Yeah.
That's what they did.
Yeah, and there's the parallels with the black and tans and so on, the exact parallels to here. So I don't know if it's my imagination, but I don't know if there's been a bit of a shift in your stance recently. You've recently retired from the 174 Trust. As we were saying before, you're maybe making a bit of a split from your association with the Presbyterian church. Is that going to free you up to be more outspoken on these things, or
more outspoken? Yeah, well, I think as I've tried to do it at most of the rallies where I've been invited to speak, I've tried to say that I was never there as the CEO of 174 Trust because my board got nervous. They're probably taking a deep sigh in that I don't have that status now, so I can do what I want. I don't know whether I'll be any more outspoken. I mean,
I wasn't saying you're not outspoken enough. It's just you to take any shackles off. Well,
I've said, people have been saying to me for the last 6 months when they heard I was retiring, what are you going to be doing? And there's a non-profit that I chair in North Belfast that works on suicide prevention. I said I would keep that going, commitment for a while. I've resigned from other boards, but my Palestinian activism is part of who I am. I can't park that.
It's non-negotiable.
I can't park that. So I whether it's Caris Ireland or Christians for Palestine, or if we ever get a Prods for Palestine going, IPSC, I will remain active, and hopefully just as outspoken.
Yeah. And like in terms of the work you did with the 174 Trust, which, as I said at the start, was to do with peace and reconciliation here, it seems far too early to speak about peace and reconciliation in Palestine. How do you see any path to moving to that sort of point from here, and like what were the lessons learned from here that might apply there?
Well, one of the first lessons I learned in thinking through theories of peacemaking was if you don't have justice, you can't have peace.
Yeah,
you create justice. It doesn't guarantee peace, but it certainly makes peace possible. And people here back in the 60s, well, let's say 70s, say just make peace. Justice had to be done here. Mm-hmm. in our society, for within the Catholic nationalist community, civil rights and employment legislation and housing allocation and all of those things had to be addressed. So in occupied Palestine, until there is justice for the indigenous people of occupied Palestine, I certainly don't want to talk about peace.
Yeah.
And I think any attempts to peace are just deflection and whitewashing, and a way of, again, silencing Palestinian solidarity movements. We got to get justice for the people of occupied Palestine, and then start thinking constructively about what that region could look like.
Mm. And what does justice in your mind look like for just stopping the genocide would be a start?
My phone up here because Omar Burke, the conference I was at on Saturday, the main point of his contribution, Omar Burke, the founder of the BDS movement, three demands: end the occupation, dismantle the apartheid structure, and ensure the right of return for Palestinian exiles. Those are the three sort of non-negotiable things that the Palestinian people are looking for. Certainly mine and I mean, Palestinian activism in the UK or anywhere in the world, I mean, we're not speaking on behalf of ourselves. We're certainly... We were very clear that Caris Ireland was there to give a platform for Palestinian Christians to speak for themselves. That's what they're asked. Those are their non-negotiables. End the occupation, dismantle the apartheid system, and ensure a right of return. There are other things that will flow from that as you create an inclusive society where there is space for everyone, regardless of where they've come from or why they've come. I think those are justice issues there and then, and then we can start building a peace movement. But let's get those.
It implies a sort of one-state solution, doesn't it? That sort of.
I think so. I mean, I again, I'm always hesitant in putting forward my views, but certainly in readings that I've done, in the last 10 years, it's something that Palestinians have thought this thing, and academics who have worked with Palestinians would seem to be. I mean, people talk about the two-state solution is impractical. I mean, apart from the fact that Netanyahu and his gangsters have said that it isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Something has got to change there. And I think the international community, led by the US, because they're the ones that are funding them and giving them the cover, the moral cover in the UN and the international courts. A one-state solution where the rights of everyone are guaranteed, and the apartheid structure is dismantled. I would see as the one sustainable proposal for long-term peace.
Yeah, and that does seem a long way off. And we hear the reflexive mouthing of politicians here is to talk about a two-state solution, and a two-state solution, as you say, which Netanyahu and his goons openly say they don't want, and then our politicians in many Western countries won't even recognise the state of Palestine while going on about the two states.
Well, even before the Oslo Accords and after the Oslo Accords, I mean, it was a way of, placating the international community. Two-state solution. I mean, the mask has slipped. Mm-hmm. In the last year or so, and the Israelis, particularly Netanyahu and Smotrich and Benjamin, I mean, they've been very clear that that's not going to happen. So something has to be made
from outside. Probably. That's the corollary of that, isn't it? That it is, like you said, about it's the responsibility of all of us to make it happen from outside.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen from inside.
Well, people said the same about South Africa.
Yeah.
Before it happened, and it happened. And it's not an ideal situation even now, but something has to be done, and that's what needs to be done.
Yeah. I think we can leave it there unless there's anything else you want to say or cover.
No, I think I've been able to vent.
It's been a therapy session for you,
and get a lot of things out there. Thank you for the opportunity to chat with you, and if we can do anything together, going forward to advance the cause of justice for Palestine, then and I'm up for it.
100%. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming in, Bill.
Thanks.